you want to say anything first on that, or?
I'm Anna Hughes. I'm also on our Faith Life Committee, which is responsible for helping coordinate these forums. We just wanted to give everyone a warm welcome, whether you're joining us in person or on Zoom. We will, in the next coming into 2026, be changing a few things about the forum, so stay tuned for that. The primary thing is just in order to make sure that we have people who are able to not only help facilitate, but also continuing to have wonderful quality forums. We will be reducing the amount of forums we have in 2026. And also a reminder that in December, just due to the Advent and Christmas season, there's no forum next month, but then we'll be back in January and February and March. And now I'll hand it over to Do.
Good morning, everyone.
Good morning.
How are you all doing?
Great.
Good. Well, thank you so much for inviting me to speak. I grew up in Rochester. My parents still live here, so it was nice to be invited back to Christ UNC in my hometown. I live in Minneapolis now, but I'm the organizing director for the Coalition to Dismantle the Doctrine of Discovery, which is a binational coalition of people of faith all across, especially the US and Canada, working for Indigenous liberation and justice. In our title, we talk a lot about what we're dismantling, these kinds of systems of oppression that come out of the Doctrine of Discovery, but I think it's also nice to assert in the beginning that we're for life, we're for liberation of some of the most marginalized and oppressed peoples across this planet, and we're for the more than human world as well, the thriving of our plant relatives and all life on this planet. And I'll say that I first became interested in this work by following the Line 3 resistance activism. Perhaps some of you were aware of that tar sands pipeline that was built in northern Minnesota about 4 years ago. There was a really strong Anishinaabe or Ojibwe-led resistance movement. And I was a part of that work through Minnesota Interfaith Power and Light and MN 350. Really one of my first experiences in an Indigenous-led activist space. And I showed up to that space in part because of my own spiritual commitments to water and was really surprised, I guess, as some of my own naivete, surprised that our government ultimately sided with a corporation and disregarded the concerns of some of the most impacted communities up north, Indigenous and rural communities. So that, for me, really revealed that I didn't understand some of the structures, the laws and policies in our country and why this would happen. You know, the activism, there was some direct action tactics, putting bodies in the way of construction, but there was also, tactics in the judicial courts, right? Lawsuits or appeals to our elected officials. And when none of that ultimately worked, I was really aware that there was something bigger going on here. So that same year, I read a book called The Land Is Not Empty, Following Jesus and Dismantling the Doctrine of Discovery, which is a book I'd recommend to you if you're interested in just learning more about the Doctrine of Discovery. It was written by our coalition co-founder, Sarah Augustine, who's an Indigenous activist. And in that book, she really lays out this connection between the Doctrine of Discovery and ongoing extractive capitalism. Which we still see, even as we're starting to pivot away from fossil fuels, we still see extraction in some of the minerals required for the green transition. So ultimately, in the coalition, we're calling us to a deeper transformation beyond this logic of extraction. That's kind of my overview, and we'll get into some more specifics. But I wonder, before I move away from our logo, I just want to say these bird-like images kind of meant to evoke following the spirit of life. And so I thought it might be nice to just start together with a couple shared breaths. This is just an invitation. We're really thinking about what better way to invite in that spirit of life than through our own animating breath. that was given by the Creator, right, to all of us, to man, to all the living ones. So just inviting you, if you want to close your eyes or lower your gaze, you can do that, but just inviting you to connect with a deeper breath. Breathing in and breathing out. Another breath in. And another breath out. With one more shared breath, maybe inviting in a little gratitude for this breath, for this spirit of life, animating your lungs, days around you. So we're going to use this phrase, the doctrine of discovery. I apologize for this yellow. I need to change the title. We're going to use this phrase, the doctrine of discovery, a lot in this talk. And I'm just curious to see with like a show of hands, is this a familiar phrase? Have you heard this before? Okay, so a couple hands. For some, is this your first time hearing this phrase, the doctrine of discovery? Okay, yeah, and that's pretty typical, right? A lot of times we have not even heard about this. So for those who did kind of raise a hand, I don't want to put you on the spot, but I will invite you if you want to just kind of share with us, what do you already know about the doctrine of discovery? What is this that we're talking about?
It was a papal bull.
And I'm going to invite you just to include our folks on Zoom.
It was a papal bull.
Okay, a papal bull. And what is a papal bull?
It's in the 15th century. The 15th century.
Okay, so from the 15th century, papal bull, like a doctrine from the Pope at the time. Yeah. Any other, what else is the doctrine of discovery? Yeah.
It basically said anybody who discovers a new people in a new land, you have every right to go and convert them. I think.
Conquer.
Yeah. So this notion of discovery, like new lands during this time of European exploration. And you said something about if there were people in the land who weren't already Christian, right? Like, so this was really establishing a hierarchy where if there was already Christian monarchies that had been in those lands were not to be invaded. But if there were no Christians, so if there were Muslims in the land or indigenous peoples in the land, those lands were okay to come in and take. So one of the ways I also like to think about it is that the church gave moral authorization for ambitions that were economic and political. But the church's role in giving that authorization and sanctifying this is why in the coalition we actually are now calling in Christians and people of faith into this work. Because with what we know now, we can understand these hierarchies are wrong, right? We can understand that from our own moral frameworks, and we can actually do something about that. So one thing I also want to highlight, and we'll go through some of our talking points in the coalition, is that this is actually a whole paradigm, whole legal and philosophical framework. Another kind of maybe parallel example would be segregation. So with segregation, that also was a whole paradigm, right? It wasn't just one law or one policy. It was a framework that affected all sectors of our society, right? The healthcare system. Segregation impacted the healthcare system. What about the transportation system? Segregation impacted the transportation system, the education system. I'm sure we could list many more, right? But this is a similar kind of thing where we're talking about a paradigm, many laws and policies. We actually say a whole body of laws and policies that dates back to these papal bulls. And actually this name, the doctrine of discovery, comes from an 1823 decision penned by Justice Marshall, where he acknowledges that this was, maybe not right, but this was the way it was in this land. And it was one of the first times that this actually gets formally introduced into our laws. And then many, many other laws come out of that because our system is based on precedent. So we're talking about many laws, right? And it impacts all sectors of our society. And where it especially becomes evident is when we see these instances of extractive industry still wanting to come in and encroach upon Indigenous lands or minerals or other resource extraction. As we were just talking about, right, this gave Christian governments the moral and legal rights to invade Indigenous lands. These patterns of oppression continue to exist today. So we're not talking about something in the past. We're still talking about something that is our present reality, because these are still laws and policies, right, that shape reality for all of us, not just for Indigenous people, but all of us in this country. Yeah, and this paradigm that legitimates extractive industry and the destruction of Indigenous communities. So this image, have you seen this image before?
Yes.
Okay, some folks are familiar. Whether or not we've seen it before, we can probably understand what's being said in this image based on just the culture that we're in the United States. I'd love to give you just a moment with this image, and I'll just ask you, what do you notice? And if you have a noticing that you want to share, just raise your hand and I'll come on over. What do you notice in this image?
It's a hook. Around your, yeah. If there is a hook underneath what she's holding, it looks like it's a hook.
Yeah, so noticing that she's holding something. So what do you think? What is she holding? Is it a hook or what is it?
Book.
Bible? There's a book. Maybe it's the Bible. Yeah, what about in her other hand? What is that she's holding?
Oh, very what?
Electric wire. Yeah, so it looks like she has the cable wire. And maybe that's what she's like, the rolled up cable wire. Yeah, and it's really hard to see, but in her hand, it actually says school book. Yeah.
I have someone at home. The native people are not only being driven away, they are being driven away into the background. The progress of the settlers is the foreground.
Yeah, really good noticing. So there are Indigenous people represented, and they're being driven away, and noting that this feels very central. What else do you notice about the central figure?
She's the divide between there's light in the more, industrial area, and it's really dark and gloomy, kind of where I think you're supposed to presume that the Indigenous folks are.
Yeah, really important, right? There's a way that lightness and darkness are being used in this image to convey something, right? So the Indigenous people are more in this dark side of the frame, including even the buffalo. And then this central, very white woman figure and all the progress associated with Western society is cast in this lightness, right?
Who was Mr. Gas?
I'm not sure, but this was actually an advertisement at one point.
They're headed west.
Yes, well.
They're headed west.
I can't quite make it out, but to the left of the book and the cables, is that the hanging of the Dakota uprising? That you see some stick
Scaffolding.
scaffolding.
So I don't know.
Yeah, I mean, it's a good question. I'm not sure, but this kind of central, there's definitely, it looks like possibly folks dancing and then there's some teepees.
Oh.
Gas.
Yeah, so this image is often closely connected with manifest destiny. And yeah, I feel like that one's often more familiar for us. We've often heard that term in our US context. And so this image is often associated with trying to describe what manifest destiny is.
Teacher.
So how do we want to describe, what is manifest destiny in our American context?
The right to move wherever you wanna move.
Okay, the right
East
to
or west.
move wherever you want to move, especially westward,
Concord.
conquer, yeah,
It's an ordained right.
ordained, right, yes, I think that's a really important part, is this sense of a God-given, right?
Divine.
Divine right, yeah, and we can think about, ways that the central figure is also kind of evoking that divine right or angelic quality. I think she's actually supposed to be Columbia and maybe representing knowledge. But all of that, right, is imbued in this image, that sense of rightness in this supposed divine order, right?
But she kind of reminds me also of the Statue of Liberty.
Yeah.
Both represented as women.
Yeah, so different ways that women are being used to represent these more abstractions.
Someone at home,
Oh, yeah.
that someone agrees that exactly it's our destiny to take over.
Right. So one of my co-organizers has sometimes said that, manifest destiny is the kind of American flavor of the doctrine of discovery. But the doctrine of discovery is a global problem, right? This is not just in the United States, but there's lots of instances of settler colonial societies all around the globe where the new society comes in with the intent to replace or dominate the existing population, right? So there's that. But the other thing to be considering, so this is actually an exercise from one of our coalition trainings. And this is an exercise that we call revealing relationships of extraction. And the idea is that sometimes we think that we're not in any kind of relationship with Indigenous peoples, maybe because we don't have a relationship with Native Americans, in our local context. But we are in relationships with Indigenous people all around the world because of our global capitalist economy. So this exercise asks folks to find just 5 things in the room that they're in. So it could be like your cell phone or coffee at home or, something else, your car keys, right? And then to actually look into, okay, so what minerals comprise this thing in my home? And then where do those minerals come from, right? So this was from one of our trainings and a couple of other people's responses. And so we recognized, copper coming from Arizona, or gold coming from Suriname, or lithium from Argentina, right? All of these minerals, ultimately, we're still connected through the things that we use, through these relationships. And they're just relationships of extraction. They're not relationships of solidarity or relationships as we would traditionally think of them, but they are still a relationship. And if we're a little bit disturbed by that, we can actually start to change or be a part of a bigger change of how we rethink our economies. So that we're thinking about people and planet first and not profit. Okay, so I've done some talking, but part of this is just practicing putting it in our own words. Can't tell you how many times I have to think of, okay, how am I going to say this in 1 sentence or 2 sentences, so that folks can recognize it. So I'm going to give you a chance to try to put it in your own words in a pair. First, I'm going to read what our typical definition is. So we say the doctrine of discovery is a system of laws and policies designed to remove Indigenous peoples from their lands. It originated from documents written by the Pope in the 15th century. In these papal bulls, the Pope gave authority to European Christian monarchs to invade and conquer pagan lands or lands that were not yet controlled by a Christian monarch. Discovery meant that the first monarch to stake claim to a land had the first right to claim title to it. The doctrine of discovery granted authority to European monarchs to kill, remove, displace, and control Indigenous tribes. This authority remains today. So what I would love is for you to find a partner. And person 1, just try to describe this in your own words, you know? How would you describe what this is? And then the person too is gonna listen and just reflect back what you heard that person say. And then we will switch roles. Okay? So maybe just find a partner next to you. If anyone needs a partner, we can help you find someone. Folks on Zoom, maybe we can put you in a room together. Let's maybe take the, 2 or 3 comments. What was that like, trying to put this in your own words? Having your partner listen and collaborate with you on how to talk about this. Anyone have any observations?
It was the opposite of what happened to the indigenous people.
Do you want to say more?
I mean, this process of actually collaborating with someone is the opposite of what happened to the indigenous people.
We talked over, we both talked about some of the breeding, sweetgrass. She really deals with the side of what's happening still in the United States. And that was
Great.
meaningful.
The more we talk, the more emotional it became.
Yeah, that's a good noticing. I think, as we do this work, those feelings of, sadness or grief, right? Maybe it's rage even.
Yep.
Really, I think it's good to honor those feelings as a reflection of our own humanity, right? Because this is really hard stuff to talk about. Yeah.
So my husband and I grew up on the East Coast. And we learned all of the great things about Thanksgiving Day and how wonderful it was that the natives shared with us. But what we didn't talk about, because there were not as many Native Americans left on the East Coast, we didn't have a lot of contact with Native Americans, but this summer we traveled to 8 national parks in the Northwest, and we met many Native Americans. We heard stories and experienced things differently than we had growing up.
And I'll add on that trip, this is relevant today. There was a Native American speaker, songwriter who went over, it was the Blackfeet Glacier National Park. He was part of the Blackfeet Nation and went over there. But he was the one that started out on this whole thing with the Papal Bulls of the 1500s, which is where I first heard about it. And I bring this up because I doubt that he'll be able to give the same park ranger, it was a park ranger talk, he was brought in. But I doubt he'll be able to give that talk next year.
Never again.
Never again.
Well, and the thing that probably also grown up on the East Coast is that we ignore the fact that we survived, those first settlers survived that first winter and year because of the Indians.
Yeah.
If it hadn't been for the Indians, they were all been dead.
Yeah.
Right. And we don't acknowledge that.
Yeah, well, I'll just say one thing I'm noticing in kind of all of these comments is a recognition that, under a system of colonization, settler colonialism, these stories that we get raised with of our own rightness, right? That's part of the dominant assumptions and versions of history that we get taught. And as we do this work and recognize or listen to Indigenous people's version of history and realize that we're not aware of the full story, I think that impetus towards, well, then what is decolonization and what of our attitudes or our stories do we need to actually examine and replace with a fuller version of the story? And that often is a big part of the cultural, spiritual, personal work that folks from settler lineages kind of have to undergo as we do this work. So it really is, it's big transformative stuff to face into this. Yeah, and I saw there's a couple more comments. I'll give maybe 3 more folks the chance to speak.
I just want to point out that the reality that we need to talk about with the connection to our own time is how these monarchs used the Pope, the coalition with the Pope to justify what they were already planning to do.
Right.
Religion was embedded with politics.
Always has been.
Since
The question I have is, has that 15th century bull, has that been rescinded? You implied that it wasn't.
Well, so this is what's kind of interesting, right? There actually have been a lot of repudiation efforts. I think even the Pope a couple years ago did issue an apology or something, or different denominations have gone through formal processes of repudiating the doctrine of discovery. But we're not talking about something that's purely symbolic, right? Because at this point, we're talking about something that's in our legal system, in our laws and policies. And so this is why we actually have to change laws and policies if we're going to change this legacy at all. So I think that's a really good question. And it speaks to, again, like, what is our work as people of faith, as Christians who repudiate this doctrine of discovery, and recognizing that, well, our structures do need to change, right? Our systems, our world ultimately would need to change for justice and liberation.
Is there an online question? There's both.
I just want to be able to share online. People at home were able to talk, and Millie and Francis discovered that they both had read at least part of, and Francis had read all of The Land Is Not Empty. It's a book. It was on the UWF reading list 3 to 4 years ago, and we addressed it in the Minnesota Repair Community Group that Millie's part of, as well as hers, Augustine, the author, speak. He also pointed out that we act as through the doctrine of discovery, as though the doctrine of discovery was part of our history. It is current reality. Look at what happened with the pipeline up north. We are still extractive and using their land for whatever we want.
Yes, that's such a good point to keep coming back to, right? This is present reality. This is still ongoing today. And sometimes it can be hard to recognize it because we've been so ingrained into the rightness of this story. I just want to do a time check because I know some folks might need to leave for 11 o'clock service. Are we all good for a little bit? What time is it right now?
It's 10:50. Yep, 10:50.
10:50. Okay, so about five more minutes? That sounds all right?
That's fine.
Okay. One thing I'd love to just share with you is about some of the local repair work that's being done. So there's a Rochester repair community that Millie, as Millie was speaking to, is connected to, and other organizers from other faith groups in Rochester. But there's also a whole Minnesota-wide repair community, so many different geographic repair communities working together. And we formed, about 5 years ago, I think, in support of this Dakota-led organization, Makoche Ikichupi. And that's in Dakota, it means land recovery. Makoche Ikichupi is a 501c3. So they formed particularly with this vision of justice for Dakota and all Oceti-Sakowin people in their homelands of Minnesota. So they have a vision that by the year 2050, there will be 10 interconnected eco-villages that are Dakota-led, that are places of cultural and language revitalization, and sort of a return to some of their traditional ways. So in this picture, you can see this is at the first eco-village site near Granite Falls, Minnesota. They are building what is called an earth lodge, which is a more traditional structure. When they're finished, they kind of look like mounds with sod on them. But they're indigenous technology at their best because without the use of fossil fuels, these structures stay warm in the winter and well insulated and stay cool in the summer. So they are building these earth lodges one by one in each of the sites. They've acquired 3 sites in Minnesota so far, 2 sites of eco-villages. Another is a wild ricing site. And the hope is that these will be interconnected food sovereignty, villages that's really trying to revitalize Dakota ways in their homelands. So I want to just name that in particular as a local way that some of you might consider getting involved. I'll definitely share my email. So if anyone is interested, I can connect you to that Rochester Repair Community list. And so some of our activities, sometimes we actually go when invited to these earth lodges and learn from Indigenous teachers involved in those projects. We've also sometimes done state level legislative advocacy work. So just a quick story, when these earth lodges were first built, Makoche Ichupi received a cease and desist order from the city of Granite Falls. And they said, we don't have to do this, but it's against state building codes, the way that you're building. So this actually then required a legislative campaign, which is how a lot of folks first got involved, because they needed to create a law in Minnesota that Indigenous communities could apply for a waiver to build according to their traditional ways. Luckily, that was a pretty easy sell in the legislature, so that was able to pass in just 2 years. And now, not only Makoche Ichupi, but other Indigenous groups in the state have this opportunity to build according to their traditional ways and not have it be, quote, illegal. But it's just one example of ways that the law sometimes does really need to change so that an Indigenous vision can be fulfilled. And that's where some of us can come in and contribute our advocacy work as well. We're also, in this coming year, the repair communities are going to be supporting wild rice protection legislation. There's a couple different bills. It has to go through all these different committees, depending on, if it's a voting restriction or a pesticide provision, or so there'll be lots of opportunities to engage. The organization leading that work is called Rise and Repair, and they have a whole platform at the state level in Minnesota for Indigenous rights and climate action. So just wanted to lift those up. I won't say these are some of our other partners. I'd love to come back and just share more about the coalition's work with you, but wanted to start with more of this one-on-one or 101 doctrine of discovery. And then where I'll end is just this image as a way to kind of cleanse our palates from that first image that we saw. This is directly in response to that image. It's called Reversing Manifest Destiny. And I'll give you a couple moments to just look at what you notice, but I might also prompt you to think about, okay, look here, what is happening with lightness and darkness? What is this image saying?
I have something in the chat.
Oh, okay, something in the chat. What do you notice here?
Cleansing.
The darkness here is really associated with the pollution from industry. What was that?
It's simply reversed.
It's reversed, right? What else do you notice? That is bringing back the light. Yeah, bringing back the light and the light, right? The buffalo coming behind her. The other thing I notice every time is that there's no people in this part of the picture. In the other image, it was like the central figure coming towards the Indigenous people. But here it's not people, it's industry, right? It's corporations, and it's the pollution of our earth that is what's being cast in the darkness. And yeah, the return of life being associated with the light. Yeah.
Also, the central figure is not a white woman.
Yeah, the central figure is an Indigenous woman. And actually one of the terms for, perhaps you've heard like land back, but another way to say that is land rematriation, which signals that there's a whole cultural reclamation process that also happens where women and the feminine, Mother Earth, all of that, is back in right harmonious relationship. And so that's also kind of what I see her representing, is that wider land rematriation, when land is returned, how culture can be revitalized as well.
There's so much information.
So I think Yeah, let's end there for today, and I hope that we'll stay connected and that we'll just have more opportunities to keep connecting around repair work and what we do as Christians to dismantle these systems.
Thank you, Joe, and yeah, we'll make sure we have your contact information, so those of you that are in small groups or connect groups can follow up, and yeah, I think there's probably several of us here that would be interested within a small group setting or even another event to learn more about those initiatives.
And I just shared a couple of things that were online, going back to the Minnesota repair community that you mentioned, there is a Zoom meeting, Minnesota Community Repair Community Zoom meeting on Tuesday. And so can send that out too. And then there was a question about, if someone loves the picture and wants to buy a print of it and will support the artist, that's possible, but Charles Hilliard's.
Awesome, it was.
Which one?
Yeah, it was commissioned for Indian Land Tenure Foundation. So I would look, maybe there's something on their website, or else just noting the artist's name, Charles Hilliard. And the title, you might be able to find a print with just the internet searching.
You know, I couldn't help
Well, nice meeting
thinking
you.
about
I'm
that
cool.
dark cloud that it points to difficulties.